Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Building Relationships and Networks digital event. My name is Craig Greendale, and I'm an event coordinator here at CMI, and I will shortly be handing over to David McLaughlin to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today to those who book to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David to begin today's event.
Thanks, Craig, and welcome everybody to this morning's event. What I'm going to be talking about today is primarily about networks and building networks, but I think it's really important to think about the difference between networks and relationships, and actually is there one? And because a lot of the things that I'm talking about, although I talk about networks, will work with relationships as well, and you'll see what I mean as we go through this morning. So when we think about networking, we can get overly complicated in what we think about as networking, and we can think about things too technically. So for example, a dictionary definition of networking. Network involves establishing, developing and maintaining informal and formal business relationships with existing and potential colleagues, customers, clients, suppliers, and other contractors, and on and on and on and on. And it's a very technical approach to what we can largely think of as chatting with a purpose. Now, that's not meant to sound flippant, because obviously, we have a purpose here. And very often when we think about networking, we're thinking about business networking. We're thinking about networking for a reason. We're thinking about networking to achieve a purpose. And it's really important when we think about networking to try and go at it as easily and as comfortably as possible, because for some people, it's really, really challenging. Going into a room full of strangers, going into a room full of people you don't know, you may be experiencing imposter syndrome as you go into that room. You may be experiencing all sorts of things. So bearing in mind, if you do that with a purpose, it becomes slightly easier. So chatting with a purpose is not about being flippant. It's trying to make it a lot more comfortable for all of us that are engaged in doing it. So if we're thinking about chatting with a purpose and we think about what is our purpose, what is it exactly we're trying to do when we go into a networking situation, or indeed when we're building relationships with anybody? If we meet somebody new and we think, let's build a relationship with that person, whether that's neighborly, whether it's business, whether it's personal, whatever it might be, we need to think about why we're doing that. What are we trying to achieve? What are we risking by putting ourselves out there? What are we hoping to gain in terms of the payoff from being in that relationship, if you like? So we need to think about what that purpose is, and it can be things like expanding your network. If this is a business or you're trying to sell something, then the bigger network you have, the more people you have to interact with, the more likely you are to be successful in what you want to do. Is it about developing a new product? Is it about developing your team? Is it about engaging with clients in order to build better relationships with clients and foster new business, foster different avenues of thinking, different ways of looking at things, and different ways of potentially building your business, supporting their business, and generating something else in the community? So it can be a much wider field, if you like, of what we're trying to achieve. Is it about just making friends? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. While we're talking about networking, we're thinking about businesses and sales and all the things that come off of traditional business networking. It's also about making friends, making colleagues, making people that we can work with in the future, people that we could potentially become mentors for, or they could become mentors for us, people that we can bounce ideas off. All of these things start in the same way. We can also think of networking as developing teams, for example, and developing communications within an organization. Now, one of the things I used to see as a consultant was you go into an organization and you'd find silos, and they still exist in places today. You'd get one team which acted as a silo. They didn't communicate with other parts of the organization. They didn't see the need to, they didn't see the benefit in it. There was no networking often between different parts of the team. So you lost a lot of that cross-fertilization within organizations. You lost a lot of ideas. Things would be repeated. There'd be stuff done in one area that didn't work, would then be done in another area that didn't work, because nobody had said, don't do that, that's not going to work. We did that, and this was the outcome. So we're losing those things, whether it's making friends, developing a team, building a business, whatever it is. So we need to We need to think about those things and be very clear about what our purpose is when we go into this. Now, word of caution here, what our purpose is when we go into it is very likely to change as we engage with other people. That dynamism, that fluidity that we have when we're in networks is really, really important. It's also important to think about networks as part of a system. So when we think about system thinking, how does what we're doing interact with what other people are doing? How does it benefit from what other people are doing? How do we learn from what other people are doing? How is that connection around the various networks? So think about networks as being fluid and multi-tentacled, if you like an octopus. We're not just thinking about one network that we belong to at the cost and exclusion of other networks that we could belong to, that we may go into and dip out of from time to time, that we may have certain reasons why we pop into that network, do what we need to do, pop out of it. We parachute in, we do something for them, they do something for us, whatever it might be, but we don't stay in that network as a whole. So rather like we think of project managers, if you like, where we go to a certain area, we do a certain thing, we involve lots of people, and then we pull out and we go and do something else. So we think about all of those things when we're thinking about developing teams and developing networks. We need to understand the working environment in which we operate in and the environment in which we're going into as part of a network. We need to understand that for a number of reasons. There are things like culture, there are things like expectations, there are things like dress, for example, there are things like how the language is in those places, how do we deal with people, what are our expectations from those people, do we understand the culture, do we understand the give and take, all of the things that are part of being within a network. We need to also understand where our allies are and where our competitors are likely to be, and those people who are not going to be allies, who are going to be counter to what we want to do. Now, I'm not going to call them enemies because that's not the right expression, but you get the idea here. Who are our friends? Who are going to be challenging? Who is never going to be part of our network? So we need to understand all those things as well. And at the end of the day, it's really important to remember you may be being in networking because you're bored, because you've got nothing else to do, because you don't know anybody, because you're feeling lonely. And that's absolutely fine as long as you understand the reason why you're going into these networking situations and you're not giving people the impression that you're there for some other reason. So you're not promising to do things you can't deliver. All of these reasons for networking are completely valid, but it's important that we understand how those webs, those networks all work together. Really, really important to see that and understand that in ourselves before we start engaging with other networks. So before we engage with other networks as well, it's really important to try and understand what kind of a networker you are. So, for example, are you a conscious networker? Have you identified that purpose? Have you got a clear goal when you're talking to people? Now, if you are, just be careful that you're not coming across as too clinical. If you're a conscious networker and you have a very clear idea what it is you're trying to achieve, make sure you do that in a way that is empathetic. It looks at what's going on in the room. You read other people's emotions, because otherwise you can come across as quite clinical. You know, I'm here to sell. I want to sell. You don't want to buy it, right? I'm going to move on. Let's do something else. It's not all about that. You will get known in the network as being quite cold, quite clinical, if you're not careful with that. So just bear that in mind as something you might want to think about. Think about your EQ, and we'll talk about EQ in a moment as we go through this morning. Are you an open networker? Do you take a longer term view of things? Are you looking to build relationships first and then look to build gains and wins for you and the other people? Is that something you're thinking about? Is this a long-term strategy? I want to get to know 10 people. Out of that 10 people, I might do business with one of them, I might not. But those 10 people might point me in the direction of another 10 people that I can talk to, and one of them might do business with me. So it's a long-term strategy here. We're thinking a little bit more fluid. We're thinking a little bit more vague, if you like, and thinking, well, what could I get out of this? How many people do I need to know? Bring in a little bit of the conscious networker. This is how many people I need to know. This is the percentage of people who are going to talk to me. We can start thinking on that, but don't show that necessarily clinically when you're dealing with people. You might be an intuitive networker. You might just enjoy mixing with people. You might be very gregarious. You like getting out there. You like getting amongst people. You talk to people. We're having a chat. We're talking about what we watched on Netflix last night. How does that tie in with something that we might want to talk about in terms of business, for example? So there's those kinds of things as well. How easy do you find this? Is this very intuitive? Is this something you love doing? Love turning up for a business breakfast, seeing what's going on in town, seeing who's doing what's happening here and there, all of those things. Find it really easy. You might be an intuitive networker. So there are things you need to think about in there as well. And again, we'll talk about that when we come to the EQ section of this presentation. Really, really important to understand that not everybody fits into those three, and you may be a very nervous networker and you really struggle to talk to strangers. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. But if you are a nervous networker, it's really important to understand your purpose, understand you, understand what you're trying to achieve, be very clear about what you're demonstrating to people, and it will start to become a little easier. Now, I say a little easier because if you're nervous, going into a room full of strangers and talking to people, thinking about what I said earlier about imposter syndrome, is never going to be easy, but we can make it a little bit easier with practice and with some clarity. So when we're thinking about who we are, mentioned who are you, think about your story, think about your elevator pitch. What is it about you that means I should talk to you? And equally, what are you looking for in me that means you should talk to me? Don't forget, this is a give and take. This is not an interview. This is, why should I talk to you? What is it about you that's interesting? Are you being authentic, or is there a dissonance between what you're saying and the way you're looking? Think about your personal brand. What are your artifacts and your first impression look like? And do they match up with you as an authentic individual? I'm going to give you an example of this. I worked in a place long time ago. I worked in public sector and worked for the county council. And one of the expectations was we had to turn up in a suit and a shirt and a tie. I did it because that's what you had to do to be part of that organisation, but I never felt entirely comfortable. I never felt entirely free, and I never felt that I could be me because of the artifacts I was required to carry, the way I was required to look, didn't match my personal brand. In a way, it stopped me from being the gregarious person, the enthusiastic, chatty, talking person I am, and added to my sense of imposter syndrome because I had an issue where I thought, well, I shouldn't be here. I'm going into these networks. These are all very businessy. Look at them all in their suits, not thinking I'm in a grey suit as well here. I'm in a suit the same as them. They're probably looking at me in the same way. But it's about that authenticity. So if you have the opportunity, and some of us do, and I appreciate some of us don't, think about your brand, think about the artifacts that you carry, think about the way that you come across before you even speak. Now, one of the things that we need to think about here really carefully is we often talk about the elevator pitch. Why should I talk to you? Why should I give you any of my time? And advice, this works both ways. The problem we have nowadays is what I call the Spotify effect or the Amazon effect. Everybody wants everything quick, simple, bite-sized chunks. If you think about Spotify, some of the songs that we used to listen to back in the day when I was a teenager had long intros. They wouldn't get anywhere now on Spotify because people listen to Spotify, and if it doesn't start in 15 seconds, they move on to the next song. So we have to grab people's attention really quickly. This is a real trick when we're networking. So I would start off, for example, asking personal questions. Why are you here? What did you hope to get from today? What's going on? Tell us a bit about yourself. Get people engaged. People aren't going to want to listen to you for very long before you listen to them. So I would always start the other way around and say, let's listen to you. Tell me about you. Why are you here? What's interesting that I can find from you? And then talk about me, because they will ask you. Now, that takes a certain amount of skill, because if we're nervous and we go into a situation where we're feeling nervous, it's very easy to just blah, 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 blah. I'm here. This is what I want, blah, 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 blah. And that will shut people down. And that will make us even more nervous. And we do that when we haven't got a purpose. We have to understand that clear purpose to why we're going into this situation. What are we hoping to give before we hope to get? So we have to think about all these things. So think about your profile, think about your elevator pitch, talk about stories. My story is this. What is your story? And make it as interesting as possible. But also find out about the other person's story. What's their story? What can you do together to achieve a win-win situation? Networking and relationships in general are about being in the right place at the right time. Now, this is This is really important when we think about what's happened in the last couple of years in the world. We've all been stuck largely in certain places, and that has hung on a bit, hasn't it? We talk to people online, and that's fine. We talk to people on Zoom meetings, that's fine, but it has its limitations. But the thinking now, of course, is if we're going to travel for 3 hours to get to a meeting, what is my purpose there? So even more, we're thinking about our purpose. What can I achieve there that I can't do on a medium like this, for example? What can I get out of that, and is it worth doing? So we need to think about where we are and putting ourselves about and being where it matters. Think about your local area. Think about the environment you work in. Think about the business sector that you work in. Where are people getting together to do that networking? Is it business breakfasts? Is it local enterprise meetings? Is it LEP partnerships? Is it the round table? Is it some other thing in a hotel? Is that accessible? Would you feel comfortable there? How are you going to get there? Thinking about logistics as well. All of these things add to your purpose, especially if you're thinking nervous. If you're going to struggle when you get there, the last thing you want to have to do is think about, where do I park? Can I park? How much is it going to cost? How do I get there? Can I get a bus? Do I need to drive? All of those things play into that purpose. So we understand the purpose, we understand ourselves, we think about logistics of getting somewhere. It might be that we want to join some of those groups when we've identified them. Now, sometimes there's a cost involved in that. There's a fee, there's a breakfast cost if it's a business breakfast. Sometimes it involves joining things. And you have to ask yourself, if that's the case, is this going to give me what I need? Can I add value to this? Or is this just another subscription I'm not going to use? Is this something I think, yeah, I'm going to join that. I'm a member of all these things. And look, I never go to any of them. So we have to think about that very carefully as well. Otherwise, we will be putting a lot of effort and cost into networking, but we won't be getting a lot of benefit out of it. Now, this is really similar to LinkedIn, if we think about it as well. We can network on LinkedIn. We link with loads and loads and loads of people. How many of them have we ever met? How many of them have we ever talked to? We join subscriptions for various updates and groups and notebooks and all sorts of things that come into our LinkedIn. But you can ask yourself at the end, so what? What do I do with this? What difference does it make? Am I adding value, or am I just a name on a list and a number on a list? What am I doing within these networks? And that's a really good way to think about it in life as well. So we go to a business breakfast, we go to a meeting, but what am I doing there? Why am I there? How am I adding value to that group as a whole? And what am I getting from that in terms of benefit for me as well? So think about the things you join, think about where you go. Now, if you do go to a physical thing, if there's a guest list, get the guest list up front. See if there's anybody who's going to be there you need to talk to. Think about why you need to talk to them. What's the purpose of you talking to them? Think about, if there are a number of people, how am I going to spend my time with these people? Can I pull a couple of people together in an introduction? Is there something common? Is there a common thread that we can all talk about so that we get the benefit of all being there in the same space and talking to each other? And remember, with all these things, try and keep a balance. You don't want to come across as clinical, hard sales. That's not the purpose of networking. We can do that in other ways, and most people will say that doesn't work. Most people outside of that environment will say that doesn't work. And depending on how you deal with people, how you act with people, that might be very challenging for you if that's not your kind of thing. Excuse me. We're putting ourselves about, we're meeting those other people, but we have to play nicely. This is not all about get. There's a lot of give in here, and we need to give in order to get. So think about listening to other people first. Like I say, what's going on for you? How are things for you? Tell me about why you're here. All of those kinds of issues. Within that, you'll start to see opportunities arise. You'll start to see things where people have a problem, and you might be able to help them solve their problem. People want problems solved these days. So if I've got an issue, I can't deal with it, but you can, there's an opportunity there for us to have a further conversation. Now, when you're thinking about network and you're thinking about win-win, don't expect to do business at the network session. The network session really is about, let's see who I can have a further conversation with. Let's see who I can have coffee with. Let's see who we can build bigger relationships with in order that we can get stuff done. Think about LinkedIn, think about other areas in which you can do this. Think about social media, and we'll talk about social media a bit more in a moment. But think about all the ways you can do this that aren't just being there physically. Some of the benefits of being locked down for a couple of years is that we've thought about these things in different ways. We haven't been able to meet people face to face as often as we would have done. So those old habits potentially have gone, and we say, well, okay, how can we do this in a way that doesn't mean we both sit on a train for 3 hours to get to where we're going, to have a half an hour meeting, to then sit on a train for another 3 hours to get home? Those days are not where they were, and we hope we don't go back to those, or I hope we don't go back to those. I think there's better ways of doing things that are more effective for everybody. Remember, we've said all the way through this, it's not about selling. This is about building relationships, which may or may not, depending on how you develop those relationships, lead on to sales, lead on to business, lead on to new opportunities in the future. But it is about building trust. And when we think about building trust, we think about that power. We think about our brand. We think about our artifacts. Are we authentic? Is there an authenticity in the way we look, the way we're behaving, the things we're saying? Is it all there, and is it all tied together in one way? Really important on building trust. Make sure you do what you said you would do. If you say you're going to do something, do it. One really good way of doing this is making sure that anybody you link with in a networking situation or a business relationship situation or anything like that, follow it up with some kind of communication. Follow it up with a call. Follow it up with an email that says, really great to meet you yesterday. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. I certainly felt I got a lot out of it, but I think there was a lot more potential. Would you be up for having a coffee sometime to discuss something further, or take that conversation on a bit longer? I didn't feel we had enough time to talk about it. All of those kinds of things really help in terms of building trust, because it's not just that vapid kind of 5 minutes where we're all trying to sort each other out and work out who's in the room that we need to talk to and all those things. It's about building trust, following on. Also, remember, this is not a sprint. This is a long-term process. Relationships don't happen overnight, especially in business. They might do in life. We might see somebody and, Cupid's arrow hits us and we fall madly in love with that person and they fall madly in love with us. In business, that doesn't necessarily work. And in lots of areas of life, it doesn't necessarily work either. So it's a long-term sprint. We need to get to know people. They need to get to know us. We need to build that mutual trust, mutual understanding, mutual interest in what each other are doing as part of that networking process. All of these things will help you to build your network in a way that really, really works. Now, one thing I want to talk about now is about thinking about building your network in different directions, and think about what people can bring and what you can bring to the party, but not necessarily in terms of hierarchy. When I was younger, people used to say, oh, what do you do? Before they would say, who are you? How are things for you? So it's all about that status. And people would say, I'll talk to the CEO, but I won't talk to the caretaker. Now, when I worked in education, in the education department for the local council, what I used to do was have to go to schools and arrange for things to be happening in the evening. Worked in adult education, and I would have to see people to get things done in the evening. Now, you always had to visit the head teacher, but the head teacher really didn't have the power. The person who made all the decisions was the caretaker. So you quickly learn who's got the real power as opposed to who's got the hierarchy. So I would go to the head teacher and say, can we put on these classes? And they would say yes. If the caretaker said, I'm not coming out on a Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, I'd rather watch Corrie than come out here and do this, then you aren't going to go anywhere. You need people in there, putting out the chairs, setting up the tables, clearing up, letting people in, locking up when it's all gone, making sure it's safe, all of those kinds of things. So think about who can get things done, not necessarily think about hierarchy. Think differently as well. Think about what's happening outside of my normal thinking here. Can I add value? Can you add value? Is there a mutual benefit to us talking? Is there a mutual benefit to us working together? And think about that pie as well. We don't think about a finite pie here. We can make the pie bigger and bigger and bigger with our networks so that there's a benefit for more people than just the few people that are talking, just the few people in that particular business breakfast. We can think about the community. We can think about bringing in those other networks, like I said earlier. Get out of those silos and think longer term in order to make benefits for everybody. Really, really important to think about that. Now, as you're aware, lots of online networking goes on now, and we can think about that in a very different way. And we can think about social media or unsocial media, if you like, depending on how you look at it. But again, it's about thinking what you're trying to achieve. Are you just keeping in touch with friends and family? Are you linking up with people from your past, trying to reconnect? Are you, what is your purpose of being on social media? What are you trying to achieve? Are you tracing your family, tracing your friends, trying to catch up with people you were at school with? All of those things. Now, here's a slight caveat here. We all perhaps have done that. I think what was that thing called? Find My Friends. It was a Find My Friends thing years ago, and I thought it'd be a good idea to go on that and see how I could, see what my friends from school were doing. Only to find out that when I was 16, somebody who I went out with messaged me on this system and told me how much I'd broken their heart when we were 16. So be careful about these things. It's not all good on the internet. Be very aware of what you're doing. Be very aware of what you're trying to achieve. And again, go back to that. What's your purpose? There are communities online, like-minded individuals, great things to be part of if that's what you want to do. If you're part of a community of like-minded individuals, whether it's online or whether it's in real life, make sure it's not an echo chamber. Make sure you're getting different thinking coming into that. Make sure you're not just agreeing with everybody and everybody's agreeing with you, and we get stuck in this little bubble that tells us how brilliant everything is and how everybody outside that bubble is not as good as we are terrible people, have really bad ideas. So be very careful about that, and always make sure you have that challenging thinking, someone in there to challenge what you're thinking about. Really important. Within that, of course, you can look for prospects and opportunities, and that win-win, and everybody can benefit from that. Think about your audience. If you're going online and you're promoting yourself online, you're networking online, think about your audience. Who are they? What do they want to know? Do they want what you've got? Is what you're selling something they're interested in? Consider the technical issues. Make sure there's enough time, and you're going to need a lot of time to do this. If you do things like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of the things that you can do, it takes a lot of time. It's no good putting something up, forgetting about it. You have to maintain it. You have to work at it just like you do a real life relationship. You have to put time and effort into it. Make sure your profile, again, online matches your authenticity, matches you as a real person, and you're not trying to be something you're not, or you're not giving the impression that you can do something you can't. So think about that really carefully. And remember, the internet is forever. When it's up there, it's up there. You can take it down, but somebody else would have maybe screenshotted it. Somebody else would have kept it. Somebody else would have downloaded it. So be very careful about what you do on the internet. Longer term, it can have a massive effect. Think about that. And we have to think about that slightly differently to when we're in a face-to-face networking situation, because people will forget. If you say something inappropriate, you can apologize straight away. And people will take that on board and recognize that that was in a moment, and they will forgive you for that and forget about it. If you do that online, you get it wrong online, it's wrong forever. So think about being very careful, being very aware of how you're networking, the influence you're having if you're operating online. That's not to say you shouldn't do it, you just need to be very aware of what you're doing. When we think about teams, we think about networking in teams, and there's a slight difference here because we're dealing with a number of individuals at the same time. And if we're managing a team, of course, we have a different relationship with that team because we are the power in a sense. They look to us for guidance, they look to us for authority, they look to us for different things. So we have to think about those teams. And we can have very formal teams, and we can have very informal teams. Whenever you get more than one person, you're going to have a team. Whenever you get more than one person, you're going to have a leader. That's just life. That's how it works. So when we think about our teams, think about who we've got in our teams, the types of people we've got. And you might want to have a look at Belbin, for example, to understand who the people in your team are. But you're going to have people who are decision makers. You're going to have people who will influence other people's thinking, and that's a really good thing. You have people who challenge, and that's a really good thing to have as well. We don't want the Aberline paradox where everybody agrees, but nobody wants to do it. So think about those things. Think about who's in your team. Identify the people that are good to network with. Identify the people who make that network work. We're going to have players who help by providing functional help, doing things, getting stuff done. And we're going to have those consent givers who give us the permission and the approval that we need to get the stuff done. This is a really good idea. I think we should all do this. So think about all those things. Think about the dynamics. What are the team expecting? What are you expecting? Has all that been talked out with the team? Are we operating equally, or are we setting up schisms and cliques within a team? If we are, you need to do away with those. You can't stop them happening personally within people. People will do what they want to do, but we can encourage against schisms and cliques because they're not healthy for the team as a whole organism. Think about that. Think about your emotional quotient as well now. So when you're going into networking, when you're building relationships, thinking about these things is really important. A little bit of self-awareness. Where are you? Are you confident? Are you a person that wears their emotions on their sleeve? Are you a person that's buttoned up? All of these things are fine. Just understand where you are in that process. Understand what works for you. Think about self-regulation. Think about your emotional self-control. Think about your trustworthiness, your adaptability. Think about how you interact with other people. What's driving you? What's your level of commitment? If you're going into a networking situation, for example, and you're not really committed to it, think again, because you need to be committed, because other people will make expectations of you and they need to have those expectations fulfilled. Otherwise, you'll lose trust. So think about that. Think about, are you committed? What are your drivers? Why are you doing it? What's your purpose? Think about understanding other people. One of the really important things you can do is read the room. Make sure that you're reading the room. What's going on in the room? Are you going against that? Are you swimming against the tide here? And again, nothing wrong with that, but is it what you want to do in order to get what you need from this interaction that you're having with other people? Think about your communication skills. Think about your leadership skills. How do you manage conflict? How are you going to manage challenge if somebody challenges you? Think about all these things. Now, these might be things that you want to work on. You identify, I'm not very good at X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to work on that, get that now down and feel a little bit more comfortable about that before I go into those networking relationship situations, because I want to get the most out of that and I want to go into it and give as much as I possibly can. So think about all these things before you get in there. Think about the dynamics of the team. We talk about that a lot, the dynamics and the culture of the place you're going into. What are the expectations? Think about what's driving others and try and recognize why others are there, what they're trying to achieve from it, what are they hoping to get. Be very, very authentic all the time. If you're not, you will get found out really quickly. Unless you've got a particular type of mindset, you won't be able to hide your unauthenticity, and you will get found out for it, and you will get ostracized from a group for that reason. Be a great communicator and be the best communicator you can be. Now, everybody's not great at this, but if that's something you need to develop, think about how that will work for you. Would storytelling work? Would metaphor work? What would work for you in a communication situation? If you're nervous, for example, going into a room with a load of strangers, what's going to work for you? What's going to get you what you need and get you where you need to be? Remember, it's two-way. We want to hear from other people. We want to listen to other people. We want to talk to other people. We want to share our story. Everybody wants to share their story, but sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes we have to hear 2 or 3 other stories before we can share our story. So remember, it's a two-way street here. Learn to read the room, see what's going on. Learn to read the group you're talking to. And there's a lovely lyric in a song I like that says, "The secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go." And one of the things, this is really worth remembering when you're in a relationship building situation, is if people are starting to switch off, if people are starting to glaze over, move on. It's time to go. There's nothing wrong with that. You might have just told them everything they need to know. And actually, there's no point in building a network with you because you haven't got anything to share. There's no similarity. There's no join between the two of you. So time to move on. Recognize it. Nothing wrong with it. Understand it. I'm just going to go and speak to this person over here. I'll be back in a bit if that's okay. You don't have to go back, but we have to be nice and we have to be polite while we're doing things. Really, really important in a face-to-face situation, don't be a space invader. Recognize those distances that people are comfortable. Don't get up in someone's face. It's a real way of shutting them down, shutting you down. They will switch off. All they will remember is how you made them feel, as Maya Angelou says. They'll only remember how you made them feel, how you invaded their space, how you made them feel uncomfortable. So really, really be careful about those social distances that we set up when we're thinking about networking. Now, think about things slightly differently here. It's not all positive. Think about what's happening in a network. Networks can be schisms. Networks can be ostracizing. Networks can be incredibly helpful and positive, but they can also be negative as well sometimes. We think about networks online. We can think about cyberbullying. We can think about stealing people's ideas. All of those things happen and we need to be aware of those, and we need to watch out for those things. When we talk about authenticity, there's a lovely quote by Douglas Adams: "Nothing travels faster than the speed of light, with the possible exception of bad news, which obeys its own rules and own special laws." And there's the other quote, isn't it, that says, "Bad news has been twice around the world before good news has got its shoes on." So think about what's happening within those networks. Networks can be good, but they can also be damaging. They can be closed, they can be cliques, they can be exclusive and exclude people from joining them. And that's not something that's a good thing, and something that you want to be aware of. How does that network work? What's the culture of that network? Is it very much a closed shop? Is that something I want to be part of? Think about bad actors, especially with online networks. Why are people there? What are they trying to do? Think about security issues with online networks. Is what I'm saying going to end up somewhere I don't want it to end up? What are other people doing within this network? And what are they there to do? Are they trying to gain an advantage over us? Are they trying to disadvantage us in some ways by being part of that network? So think very carefully about the culture, the dynamics, what the expectations are, what you can expect, what the demands on you are before you join the network and be part of the network. So some key things I want you to take away really from this morning. I feel I've talked a lot this morning, but I hope you think it's been useful. But when we think about networking, it is about building relationships, and relationships and networks, whether they're business, whether they're personal, whether they're friends, whether they're neighbours, whatever it might be, whether it's people in the pub, the darts team, whatever it is, they all work on the same principle. That all relationships about networking. Everything we do is part of a huge net of activity that goes on around the world. Remember, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We don't have to race to get a solution out of this. We don't have to race to see a benefit from this. If we can see that longer term, and that's something we're working towards, and that's great. But also be aware there will be unexpected benefits that you didn't see coming that suddenly pop in from the side, and you think, wow, that I would have missed had I not been part of this. So that alone, it's really worth being part of it. Make sure you understand yourself and what you bring to a network before you start building a network. Make sure you understand your purpose and what it is you want to get out of it. Be very clear about what you offer as well, what you bring into the party as well as what you're taking away from the party. Be the best communicator you can possibly be. And when you start communicating, I would think of ABC: accurate, brief, concise. Say what you need to say, make sure it's authentic and accurate, and say it in a short amount of time as you possibly can. That way people will be more interested. They will challenge you and say, okay, well, tell me a bit more about that. That sounds really interesting. Be interested in other people and be as interesting as you can to other people. But remember, not everyone will want to be in your network, and you certainly won't want to be in everybody else's network. Be part of the networks that work for you, not the ones that don't. You don't have to be everywhere all the time. You don't have to be all things to all people. Do what works for you. Do it in a way that's comfortable. Practice on the things you need to practice on. Develop the skills you need to develop if you don't have them already. That's the end of the input from me. So I'm going to go back to the studio now, and hopefully we've got some questions.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for the presentation. And yes, it is time to move on to our pre-submitted questions. I would like to thank everyone who submitted a question. We did receive a great deal. So I think the first question we will go with is a question from Helen. So Helen has asked, what are 3 key starter questions you would recommend to get a conversation started?
Thanks, Helen. I think this is a really interesting question, and I think it's one perhaps a lot of people will be thinking about. My 3 starter questions would be, who are you? So hello, who are you? What brings you here today? And what are you hoping to get from this? That will give you an understanding. And I would do that in, it sounds a bit clinical when I say it like that. I would try to do it in a softer way as possible, just like you would if you were talking to a friend, not like an interview. But that will give you an understanding of whether you have anything in common with other people, whether other people are there to achieve something, or whether they're there just for a chat and a coffee because the coffee's free and it's, you know what, it's 2 hours out of work. I can claim travel, I can claim my expenses. I might get a free book if I'm lucky, if it's a face-to-face thing. All sorts of reasons why people go, but you'll have a very good understanding of what people are trying to get and a bit of an understanding of the type of people they are. So that can be really helpful. So who are you? What brings you here? What are you hoping to achieve? In a way that feels comfortable for you.
Thank you, David. So the next question I would like to raise is one from Christine. So Christine says, I get brain freeze from being nervous and then tend to cover my nerves with humour. How do I keep the balance and retain some level of professionalism?
That's a really good question, Christine, and thanks for that. And I think this is something a lot of people do who are nervous going into a situation like that. We can all make up for our nerves, make up for our lack of confidence with humour. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's not unprofessional as long as it's not inappropriate. As long as your humour is appropriate to the group, which is part of that culture and dynamics. You know, if it's a very serious, very studious group, then humour might not be the answer. But a way to deal with that is to be prepared. What is your purpose? What do you have to offer? What's my story? If you can answer those three questions yourself as well, who are you? What brings you here? What you're trying to achieve? You can answer those for yourself before you go into a networking situation. That will help you deal with that brain freeze and hopefully help you overcome the need to, and we've all done it, the need to fill a gap with some humour. Humour can be brilliant as an icebreaker. It's not unprofessional. It's only a problem if it becomes inappropriate to the group.
Thank you, David. So the final pre-submitted question we are going to bring up is one from Hilary. So Hilary asks, if networking does not come naturally to you, what is the one thing you could do to make a difference?
It's a really good question, Hilary. And all these questions, I think, are fairly similar this morning. It's about nerves, isn't it? It's about saying, well, what am I? What can I do? What do I bring to this? What's my purpose? Why am I here? If you can get a guest list, who do I need to talk to? Think about talking to small groups of people, one-on-one. Thinking about those people in a different way. So, for example, I mentioned I used to go to networking events dressed in a suit and I'd feel really uncomfortable. But you find somebody who also looks uncomfortable in a suit and talk to them first. Once you're talking to somebody, it's remarkable how many other people will come along and talk to you. But if you find that nobody else talks to you, then it might be that you're in the wrong networking group. It might be not the group for you because everybody is in a different position to you and whatever you do is not going to feel comfortable. We have to listen to our gut sometimes and think, if this is not coming naturally, is this the right group for me? But having that preparedness, having that purpose, having what you bring, how you think you can add value will help you deal with the unnatural situation. And also try to remember lots and lots of people at that meeting will be in exactly the same position as you. You're not going to be the only one in there who's finding this difficult. You're not going to be the only one in there who's challenged by this. The other thing to remember is ask yourself, do I have to network? If this is a business thing, this is an organizational thing, is this the best network for me? Am I the best person from the organization to come to this network? Or is it better that somebody else does it? Now, obviously, if you're self-employed or you're at a very small company, you might not have a choice. You might have to do it. And that's going to be a real challenge. But being prepared, having a purpose, understanding the value you bring, understanding what you're trying to achieve from this will help you with that. But you can also say, I'm not the most appropriate person for this. I'd like somebody else to go and then feed back to me because that's the way I operate. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If that's an option you can take, and that's the best option, I would consider that as well.
It's a brilliant answer. Thank you, David. And thank you again to everyone who submitted their questions. So I think now we're going to try and move on to some live questions. So if you do have something you'd like to ask, please make sure you put it in the chat now. David, is there any live questions that have come through that you would like to answer?
Sorry, Craig, I haven't been looking at them. Let's have a look. No, I don't think so. Yeah, there's a good question here from Crawford. It says, if you're not getting what you want, if you're not getting what you need from a section of those attending an event, any suggestion on how you can best extricate yourself and move on to another group of people to talk to? This is a challenge. This is a really good question, Crawford, and this is a challenge that comes back to how comfortable you are and how confident you are in moving around. There's nothing wrong with reading that room, reading that group, and as I say, the secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go, and understanding that, thinking about that. Is this getting anywhere? Are they glazing over? Am I bored? Do I need to move on? And I would just say, oh, excuse me, I'm just going to get a coffee. Just need to go to the loo. If that's the easiest thing to do, the most comfortable thing for you to say. Or somebody over there, I just want to go and speak to that person. I'll be back in a minute. Is that okay? They will more than likely say, yeah, that's fine. Move away. You don't have to make an excuse. You can just go, I catch you later, move off. But if it's more comfortable to make an excuse, I would use that kind of thing. I just need to go and find somebody. Oh, sorry, I just need to go and make a call, whatever it might be. I'm just going to get coffee. Coffee's always an easy one. If you always have a coffee cup if you're feeling nervous, because then you've always got an out. Just going to get some more coffee, or whatever it might be. But there's nothing wrong in doing that, because you will know that it's the right thing to do. They will know it's the right thing to do. Just move on to another group, wander around, find somebody else to talk to. Every time you do that, of course, the process starts again. So you're back to, hi, who are you? How are you? What brings you here today? What are you hoping to achieve? So the more you move groups, the more you have to do that. How comfortable are you in doing that? If you're comfortable, fine, do that with lots of groups. Little bits, capture the information you need, and then follow up. So we talked for a bit, wanted to talk to you longer, drop you an email, get your business card, whatever it might be. Oh, I think we met on LinkedIn. Can we catch up on there? Whatever it might be is the best way of furthering that conversation with people. I would feel very comfortable to do that.
Thank you, David. And we have just had another question come through. Let me put this on screen now, from Dave. So Dave asks, is listening a key skill in networking? You go on about communication going forward, your story, etc., but nothing is mentioned about listening.
Yeah, sorry, Dave. I should have been clear about that. Listening is absolutely key in networking. What are other people's stories? What do they have to say? What are they after? What are they hoping to achieve? What can you do together? What is interesting about them? Listening is much underrated in communication, and it is vital. We have to listen to what people say. And if you're listening, be sure not to finish other people's conversations. Be sure not to jump in. Let them speak. Let them go first. Let them tell us what we need to know. Tell us everything we need to know, and then we can go back to that and we can communicate on that. But listening is absolutely vital in networking, as it is with any kind of communication. And I should have been clear about that. Sorry, Dave. Thanks for raising that. Excuse me.
So we do have another live question from Fraser. If I can just put that on screen now. So Fraser asks, a lot of my students are new to networking and fit in the nervous networker category. What top tip would you give to a young professional? And what type of event is best for the new networker?
I think if they're students, that's a really good question as well, Fraser. I think if they're students, one of the things I would do is to set up some networking events with my students. I would give them, get a group of people together. Some people they don't know, some people they do know. I would give them challenges that they have to go and speak to certain people. So many people ask so many things. All those ice-breaking things we used to do in classrooms years ago are really good for practicing networking. And I would challenge them as well as to what they got out of that. What did they learn? What did they understand? Who are they going to follow up with? Those kinds of things. What did other people get from them? How many follow-ups are they going to go to? How many people did they start to talk to that actually they realized weren't the right person to talk to? But I would do all of that in a simulated event. This works especially with students and with younger people as well. But if you're not used to networking, and let's face it, a lot of young people do a lot of stuff online now, so face-to-face is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. But have a practice with some safe people, but not just, yeah, that's lovely. Have a practice with people who are going to say, you were a bit boring, you didn't challenge me, you didn't listen, there were so many more things I could have said if you'd have asked me. All of those kinds of issues are really important to get people to practice with. But if you've got a safe group, whether it's students, whether it's older people, if you've got a safe group to practice in, have a practice in that first before you go live.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. So I'd like to move on to this question next. So what is the best way to refuse a follow-up after a networking event with someone that is not suitable or has any synergy? to help spend time more effectively?
I guess the question is, if they're not suitable, why do you need to follow up with them? Is the first question I would say. If you feel you have to follow up, I would be absolutely honest. It was nice to meet you, but I'm not sure at this moment in time there's anything we can do together. Is a full sentence. That's fine. We don't have to talk to people that we don't want to talk to, that we don't want to be in a relationship with, just as you wouldn't in the pub. If somebody came up to you in the pub and was boring, or wherever it is you happen to go for social activities, if somebody came up to you and started talking to you and was really boring, what would you do? This is no different. I wouldn't necessarily just turn your back on them and walk away, but I would say, I can see, it's been nice to meet you, but I don't think we have anything in common at this stage. So I'm going to move on to somebody else. You can be as brutal as that. Let's be honest about it. Let's not be rude, and there's a balance. But there's nothing wrong with being honest and saying that I can't see what's in this for me, in the nicest possible way.
Thank you, David. So,
sorry, Craig. Just to add on to that, you can always turn it the other way around. I don't think there's anything I can add to what you're doing. I don't think I can bring any value here, so I'm going to step away. So you can make it about you if that feels more comfortable as well.
Perfect, thank you. So we have just had a few more questions come through. Natasha, you will be able to watch playback of this event on our YouTube page. In fact, everyone who has signed up will receive an email either today or tomorrow. I think we've got time for one more question, David, before we have to make a move. So, what's the best way to answer what's interesting about you? That's just come through now.
Wow, that's a challenging question to ask anybody, Ingrid. What's the best way to ask about what's interesting? Answer what's interesting about you. But I guess to be honest and tell the truth. What is interesting about you? What is your USP, as they say? What do you do that you find interesting? Because if you find it interesting, other people are likely to find it interesting. What's interesting about you? Somebody asked me that. What would I say? What's interesting about you? I would probably say something I'm interested in, like I play 6 different stringed instruments. Not at the same time, but I can play 6 different stringed instruments.
I mean, that's very interesting, David.
You haven't heard me play, so it might not be.
Really good answer. Thank you. And I think, yes, we do have time for one more. So I think this last question we'll take from Stuart, which has just come through now. So Stuart asks, when talking with a group, you want to say something but struggle to find a way to join the conversation before the conversation changes direction. How do you do this without being rude? That's a very good question, Stuart.
That's a really good question, Stuart, and a really challenging one, I think. But this comes down to listening. So what is it that other people are saying that you can respond to and then open the door for you to say the thing that you want to say? So I would look for those kinds of things. What is it that somebody else is saying that you can hook onto and come back to that? So, for example, somebody might be talking about problems they're having with email, and you want to talk about LinkedIn. May not be the best example, but you can say, really interesting that you're saying that about email. Is that due to your bandwidth, for example? It may not be anything relevant. I notice when I'm on LinkedIn, I have bandwidth issues. Is that something that you're experiencing as well? That's not a very good example, but you get the point, I hope. Find something that somebody's saying, hook onto that, and then add your bit. That way, it kind of opens a door. It's not always going to be easy, and you need to read the room, you need to read the group, and see if people are glazing over, see if that topic has come to its natural end. But look for a way in that isn't just blurting in, just jumping in, stopping people, saying things. So try and wait till somebody's finished, pick up on what they've said, and then change the conversation slightly to get to where you want to be. Now, maybe a slightly secure to go through a couple of steps to do that. It doesn't necessarily always go from that's really interesting, jump onto what you want to talk about. You have to find a way round sometimes, but that comes with practice, and that comes with understanding what your purpose is, what you bring, where you add value. So look for things you can do to solve other people's problems to get into that conversation. But it's not going to be easy. Don't think this is, flick a switch and it's done. It doesn't work like that. It's going to take some practice, and be prepared to get it wrong. There's nothing wrong with getting it wrong. And we don't have to be in every single group. So if you get it wrong, if it doesn't feel right, maybe that's not the right group for you.
Brilliant answer. Thank you, David. So this does draw us to the end of our session. Is there any closing remarks you would like to feedback, David?
I think the biggest thing really is just the takeaways I talked about earlier. Be very clear about what you're trying to do. Be authentic. Listen. Communicate as well as you can. And expect for it not always to work. This won't work all the time, but you'll find the groups that work best for you. If you keep practicing at it, keep having a go, you'll find the networks and the groups that work best for you, and the ones where you can add value, and that's where you're going to get the biggest benefit from. Whether it be social, business, whatever. Find those like-minded people that will challenge, but everybody wins.
Brilliant. Thank you. So yes, that's it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you again to David for your insights and your expertise.
Thank you all for your time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, David. So don't forget, if you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and we can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. And if you're not yet a member or subscriber, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.